All right, today we are going to discuss multiplication of mixed numbers and how we can do that. So there's a term that's going to pop up in this investigation called reciprocal. And a reciprocal is a factor by which you can multiply a given number so that the product is 1. For example, 3/5 is the reciprocal of 5/3 because 3/5 times 5/3 would equal 15 over 15, which would equal 1. So let's take a look at a few problems. What we have here is we have Dakota and Yuri, and they are computing 1/2 times 2 2/3. So 1/2 times 2 2/3. What is a reasonable estimate? Well, we have a half times almost something 3. So I would think that if we have almost 3 times a half, that we're really trying to find what half of 3 is. So my estimate would be something slightly smaller than about 1.5. So continuing on, A2. Dakota and Yuri each use a different strategy. Dakota's strategy is he uses what he knows to write the fractions 2 2/3 is 8/3 to make the problem easier to solve. So he takes 1/2 times 2 2/3 and makes it 1/2 times 8/3, and then he multiplies it. 1 times 8 equals 8, 2 times 3 equals 6. Then he converts it back into a mixed number and then simplifies the mixed number. Yuri says that she could write it as 2 2/3, and she can write that as 2 plus 2/3 inside of parentheses. So she's separating the fraction from the whole number. Then she can use the distributive property to make the problem easier. Please remember that the distributive property distributes one number to everything inside of the parentheses. So that when we take 1/2 times 2 2/3, that would be the same thing, distributing 1/2 to both the 2 and the 2/3. So we would multiply 1/2 times 2 first and get a 1, and then we would add that sum, or that product, to the product of 1/2 times 2/3, which would be 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6, and then we'd add these together and we would get 1 2/6, which simplifies down to 1 1/3. So let's go on to A2A. It says, does each strategy work, and how do we know? Well, if we follow the multiplication here of Dakota, we know that 2 2/3 is the same as 8/3, because if we turn the mixed number 2 2/3 and we multiply the denominator times our whole number and add in our numerator, we get 8 over 3. So 8/3 and 2 2/3 are the same number. So through our earlier multiplication strategies, we talked about how we can multiply two fractions together by multiplying the numerators together. So 1 times 8 would equal 8, and then 2 times 3 would equal 6. So that's 8/6, and then we would simplify 8/6 down. So that we know Dakota's works because he's just making them improper and then solving it to get rid of the whole numbers. We know that Yuri's strategy works because of the distributive property. Okay, now it's been a couple of weeks since we talked about the distributive property, but what the distributive property says that if you take one number and you distribute it to everything on the inside right here, so this is one product, this would be a sum of two numbers to make a product, or one factor, factor here, then we can multiply that out. So we would distribute the 1/2 to the 2 and to the 2/3, and we would get a new problem that looks like 1.5 times 2 plus 1.5 times 2/3. Okay, so we are simply using the distributive property to help us solve. So then we have one whole over here, half of 2 is 1, and we would add it to 1/2 times 2/3, so 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 3 is 6, and that gives us 1 2/6. Okay, and then they simplified it down even further. So we know because they are each using a skill that we have already talked about using in class. So that's how we know. So A2B asks, how are the strategies similar? Well, they're similar in that they are making each, they're not multiplying the 1/2 by the 2 2/3. In Takoda's strategy, he changes the 2 2/3, the mixed number, into an improper. So Takoda changes to an improper. So that's how he takes care of the mixed number. Yuri, on the other hand, she takes the 2 2/3 and cuts it into an addition problem, because 2 plus 2/3 would be equal 2 2/3. So she gets rid of the mixed number by separating the whole number plus the fraction. Okay, she writes it as two separate pieces. So she can demonstrate that the whole number plus the fraction would be the same thing as the mixed number up here. All right, they're different because Yuri is using the distributive property, and so she's got an extra step in here, whereas Takoda, once he turns this into a fraction, we can simply apply the fraction algorithm. So it's slightly different because his is simply changing it to an improper and then multiplying, while Yuri is separating the two, whole number to the fraction, and then doing some multiplication and then adding, and so it takes an extra step. All right, so that kind of explains multiplication. We will be following the same type of strategies in class today, or tomorrow, sorry. And again, our estimation up here was 1/2 times a number that was almost a 3, and we would got that would be about 1.5 or 1.5, so 1 1/2, or 1.5, which would be half of 3. And 1 2/6 is, or 1 1/3 is pretty close to 1 1/2. So our estimation wasn't off. What wouldn't be a reasonable estimate would be to change the half into a 1 and the 2 2/3 to a 3, and then we'd get 3. So that would almost double what the answer should be. All right. So before coming to class tomorrow, I want you to try both strategies, changing it to an improper number. Okay, so in this problem, 1 1/3, if we use Takoda's, we are going to take 1 1/3 and make it into 4/3. And in Yuri's strategy, we will take 1 1/3 and turn it into 1 plus 1/3 and then distribute it. All right, so I want you to solve both problems, or solve this problem using both strategies, and then come to class with your answer, and both of them should give you the same answer if done correctly. All right, thank you. See you in class.